Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on where you're joining us from. My name is Milena Head, and I am delighted to be your moderator for today's webinar on cybersecurity. Before we get going, I have to introduce these two amazing women and leaders within the field. Let's start by introducing and welcoming Farah Ismail. Farah is a nurse, lawyer, and Senior Vice President and Chief Legal, Privacy, and Compliance Officer at SE Health. She holds a BScN and an MScN from the University of Western Ontario and an LLB from the University of Windsor. She is a skilled privacy officer and holds a fellowship in regulatory excellence from the National Council of State Boards of Nursing. Farah has led large-scale initiatives and influenced lasting change by using innovative and resourceful strategies. She has a deep knowledge of the issues that impact our healthcare system and understands the need to provide safe, accessible, and adequate healthcare from a clinical and a legal perspective. She recently has completed the National Health Fellowship Program through McMaster University, the Health Leadership Academy, where she joined forces with leaders across Canada to revitalize, retool, and reimagine the way healthcare is delivered in this country. She is a published author and a speaker. Farah, thank you so much for joining us today. We're delighted to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Next, I am absolutely delighted to introduce Gayleen Gray. As an Assistant Vice President and Chief Technology Officer at McMaster University, Gayleen leads the institution's enterprise IT strategy, systems, and service operations, and works closely with the university's leadership and the McMaster IT community to ensure that McMaster's research, teaching, and learning initiatives are supported and enabled by campus systems and infrastructure. With over 2 decades of higher education IT experience, Gayleen has been an active leader in Canada through her involvement in the CUCCIO, Canadian University Council of Chief Information Officers, including being a founder and ongoing leader for the organization's Canadian Higher Ed IT Leadership Professional Development Program. Gayleen also serves on the Canary Cybersecurity Advisory Committee and has been a frequent presenter at national and regional professional conferences in both Canada and the United States. She was also recipient of the 2013 Guelph Women of Distinction Award and for Information Technology and the 2019 CUCCIO Community Award. Gayleen, thank you so very much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Milena. It's great to be here.
And very brief introduction to me. I am Milena Head, a Professor of Information Systems at the DeGroote School of Business at McMaster. I've been on faculty for 25 years now. I'm also the Wayne C. Fox Chair in Business Innovation and Director of our McMaster Digital Transformation Research Center. At the center, we make sense of digital transformation that is impacting all of us. We gain a deep understanding of our experiences with technology and how technology impacts us by combining behavioral approaches and some very cool neurophysiological tools and techniques. My own research is broadly in the areas of use and misuse of technology. I place heavy emphasis on understanding individual differences, so how factors such as age, gender, past experiences, culture may impact how we interact with technology in good and in not so good ways. So now that you know who we have here, let's talk a little bit about the format. We will have discussions with our two experts for about 35 to 40 minutes. Then we'll address questions from the audience. There were a number of questions that were sent in advance. If you have questions during the discussion, please enter them through the Q&A. We'll do our very best to address as many as we can, but we do have a hard stop and we will wrap up by 3 p.m. All right, ladies, are you ready to get going and have a lot of fun on this very important topic? So let's start with understanding the current state, cybersecurity. So Farah, if we can start with you, this concept of cybersecurity breaches, we hear it all the time in the media. What exactly does that mean? What is this concept of a cybersecurity breach? And for organizations, what are the possible consequences for those that experience these breaches?
Yeah, it's a good place to start, and obviously level set. I think so a cybersecurity breach is really when a hacker or a threat actor is able to gain unauthorized access to a system or a part of a system for an organization. And this in turn compromises the organization's network or in part or in whole. And so some of the potential consequences, I think, that are pretty serious and significant when something like this happens is there could be a loss of service, there could be loss of access to things like portals or websites. In the area I come from, access to patient data can be paused. There's also legal and regulatory liability that can result, and obviously reputational risk. And, one of the things I just want to maybe put in here and just talk about, because I come from the healthcare context, and very, very interesting stuff that's going on, in our present day, like even just as recently as last week. Healthcare data is very valuable data. We've looked at this a lot over the course of the last little while with, things moving into a very virtual way. A healthcare record, and I just think this is such an interesting fact, is worth $250 on the US market, whereas something like credit card data is worth about $5.40. So it just gives you kind of a taste of the difference. And the reason for that is because healthcare data cannot be changed. Your data is your data. Your data only changes as your health status changes. Whereas with a credit card, you can get a new credit card, get new banking information. So it just shows you the differences even in the data that can be compromised. And, it can be used for things like blackmail and identity theft. And because you can't change it, it's pretty important to be able to keep it secure. And when this information is breached, it really does cost organizations lots and lots of money. So something to be really, really careful with.
Fascinating to hear those perspectives as to how much it might be valued on the market, but for the individual whose data is stolen, the value is so much more, right, than the $5 or the $250. So Gayleen, tell us a little bit about how this has evolved, right, from your experiences in this industry over the past couple of decades. How have cybersecurity and cybersecurity threats evolved over the years? And what would you say about the current landscape? How would you characterize this current landscape that we have?
Yeah, thank you very much for that. So, I mean, it's a fascinating thing. Of course, I've worked in higher education for a long time. Let me talk about how it's evolved. So what used to be considered to be cybersecurity threats or information security threats it used to be characterized by thinking of somebody who's, coding away in the background and maybe trying to infiltrate either large companies, small companies, trying to test systems, look for vulnerabilities, and really show off their skills. It was less of a criminal activity at one point and more of a, we call them ethical hackers, people who are looking for ways to prove that they had a good capability. And it's a bit of a trophy. You got into something and you made the news or what have you. That is not the way it is now. It has absolutely evolved into big business, and it continues to evolve and expand every day. So what used to be maybe less criminal in nature, although let me just say I work at a university, so we still have people poking around sometimes out of interest and proving their capabilities. But now it absolutely is. It's crime and it's quite expansive. So I would say that very sophisticated. All of the technologies that we love and embrace and want to take advantage of are being used against us, frankly. And all of the potential is about money. This is organized crime. And there's a lot of opportunity. You just heard Farah talk about the value of data and that sort of continuum of that value. Absolutely what people are looking for. Anything that they can get access to and monetize. So whether that is actually a breach where they go and are able to steal data that they can then turn around and either sell or use to make money, or ransomware, which of course would require you to pay money potentially if your organization was inclined to do so in order to get access to your data because it gets locked up and available to you. So I think the important thing to think about is just the evolution that is based in part on the technology and in greater part because of the individuals who are now participating in this as a money-making venture. And then if I layer on that, nation state crimes. So we are in a highly political environment. I don't think it's a surprise to anybody when you listen to the news. There are various political perspectives, and we certainly from a and I know this is true in healthcare as well, Farah, but certainly from a research perspective here at an institution like McMaster University, we're a target. We have research, highly valuable. Why go and pay for research and create things when you can go and steal data instead? So we're targeted. And then there's nation state criminal activity as well to try and either infiltrate other government information to gain an advantage politically, and or to cause disruption in the social network. So it is very, very complex. It's evolving considerably, and there's a mass array of the different types of cybersecurity activity and the potential outcomes from that. That's
wow. So
yeah, I got off to, I went straight down there. Yeah, it's kind of, I mean, I think the one thing, if I can just add, there's an estimate that I found, and it's about the estimate indicating the global cost of cybercrime by 2025 will be over $10.5 trillion. So this is costly, and it's it's very front of mind for many of us in the work that we do.
wow. So it's true. A lot of us think about hackers and that conceptualization, by the proverbial hats they might wear, the white hat hacker, the black hat hacker, but it's so much more than that. So broader, organized, big business, and very, very complex. Absolutely. Let's think about things that we do now as individuals that expose us and expose our organizations to some of these threats. Tying back to some of the work that I've been doing with my research team, for example, looking at those messages, those deceptive messages that we all get, phishing messages, whether it's an email, it's a text, those deceptive messages that are looking to persuade us to either divulge sensitive information that we shouldn't be, or to click on something that might launch some sort of malware or something that can cause harm more broadly within the organization and gain access to data, and very expensive and valuable data. To those organized cyber criminals. Saw a number that it's about 3.4 billion malicious emails are sent every day. And some of my research has looked at what makes our phishing detection, or our ability to be able to judge if something is accurate or not, if we should trust it or not, what makes us more vulnerable. One example is just how much we might have on our minds. Our cognitive load during our day-to-day, we're very busy multitasking with many different things. When we get these messages, we're often engaged in another task, right? We're engaged in something professionally or personally that we're doing. So our multitasking and how much we're doing that can definitely assess how potentially we react and how accurate we are in assessing those malicious messages. It's interesting that the research is showing that when that primary task, the thing that we're working on before we got interrupted, if it's not very cognitively demanding, right? So it's not taking a lot of your brain resources, we're actually pretty good at judging if something is malicious, whether we should trust it or not. Flip side, if we're working on something that is really cognitively demanding, that's, taking a lot of our brain power, we're still actually pretty good. And that's because we can't manage both things in our brains. So we tend to redirect our resources so that we can more properly judge and pay attention and focus to those subtle cues within those malicious messages that might tell us, maybe I shouldn't trust this. Problem comes in that middle space. So when we're involved in something that has that moderate level of complexity, so it's not something that's really easy for us or something very complex for us, and we get an interruption with a malicious message, there's actually that residual effect of the primary stuff that we're working on, that primary task, that makes our judgment really bad. And we're not nearly as good at detecting if this is something we should trust as not or not. And we end up exposing ourselves by clicking on things that we shouldn't be clicking on, exposing ourselves and exposing our organizations. So that's just like one example of what we do daily, and the mental states and how much cognitive load we have can really have a big impact as to how vulnerable we might be as targets. So my question to you, for both Farah and for Gayleen, scare us with some other facts. So what are the other things that we might do on a daily basis that make us targets? So what makes us vulnerable, or things that we don't know about cybersecurity that we may face every day? Gayleen, let's start with you.
Yeah, well, I can double down on what you just talked about. The 85% of all data breaches involve human interaction. It's social engineering. It's things that get you to react or to do something. And most of that comes through email. We're all, once upon a time we thought email would go away. Guess what? It's not. And so 75% of those come through email. And I think you're really, the point that you're really raising in your research, Melina, is 100%. We're distracted. We're so busy. We've got phones. We're in front of a computer, a phone, and a smart TV all at the same time, and we're all multi-faking along the way. And it's a huge challenge. So I would say absolutely that is 100% one of the things. The other thing that I would say, and people may not think about, is using the same user ID and password on all of their various systems and logins. And as soon as there's a breach in one place, now your user ID password pair that you use for all of those valuable things that you put your data into and interact with, that's out in the world. So I think those are two things that seem really benign, but they're not, because of the way in which they're being used against us again. So Farah, I'm sure you've got some other great ideas, but those are really prevalent for me at all times. Passwords and email and phishing attacks, huge.
Yeah, and you know what? I have to agree with both of you. I think this human factor, this element of being human and the way that we operate online is something that is a risk. And not to scare everybody, our whole world has become digital. And it's going to continue to be this way. So I agree with you, Gayleen. I think the password piece is really important, as irritating and frustrating as it is. That two-factor authentication, I think, really does help deter some of this stuff and help protect us as individuals. The other thing too, and I think, Melina, you were talking about the phishing emails. It's really interesting because they have become very, very sophisticated in nature. It's hard to distinguish or differentiate whether or not this is something that looks suspicious. Those emails used to be like really overtly suspicious. I myself have been have questioned it. And I think, one of the practices that I engage in often is, if it looks suspicious, I just delete it, because if I don't know, I just delete it, because that is the only way really to protect yourself. And, the flip side of that is, I was receiving an email from a very well-known, kind of company about my email system, and they were discontinuing a service of mine. And I paid zero attention. I thought, oh, this is false. It was actually real. And so I lost my function in this regard. So, we are contending with things that are different now. And this has become a crime. It has become something really different. So it's not to, create fear in people, but more of an awareness. And I think, the more aware we are, the better we'll be able to protect ourselves.
Yeah, I agree with
Absolutely. That. Absolutely. Let's think a little bit about digital innovation and the impact that it has on cybersecurity. So Gayleen, from your perspective, startups, as we know, play a very driving and pivotal role when it comes to driving digital innovation. That's fantastic. But for these new companies that are emerging, how do they prioritize cybersecurity, and how do they start so that they have that secure foundation right from the very beginning? What are some tips you might have for those up and coming innovative companies?
Yeah, I think it's really important to think about this from the beginning. When we work in very large institutions and systems where we're all doing retrofit around cybersecurity and trying to get systems that were created many years ago, before this was even a concern, to now fit within this this framework. So I would say, for any startup or someone starting out with something new, you really need to bake cybersecurity in by design. So that means thinking very carefully from the get-go about frameworks, ensuring that you're either educating yourself or in many cases, getting someone who can advise you to, how do we set up our network? What sort of systems do we want to have? Where should they be housed? If we're in the cloud, how do we evaluate and read through contracts and agreements to understand their security protocols? Because it doesn't matter whether it's you or somebody else managing your infrastructure, you need to have a level of confidence. You too they're your customers, you're their customer, you've got to figure out how to make this all work. So it really is about taking time. And I think that's maybe the one message you're going to hear me talk about through everything. And I think you've mentioned it in your own research, Melina. When we're in a hurry, when we're trying to get fast to finish on things, we drop our detail orientation, and therefore we may miss things. So having some advisors, ensuring that we're setting up our infrastructure and our frameworks and protocols so that we're putting cybersecurity first. That doesn't sound like the thing people want to pay attention to when they're starting up something exciting and new around a digital innovation project, system, or service. But it can't be an afterthought. And if it is an afterthought, then you actually end up paying more, and it's more complex to actually bake it in. So thinking about deployment, training your staff. And so as you onboard people into your environment, there should be clarifications about expectations on how they educate themselves, how they deal with passwords, that we don't use our administrator system passwords for everything we do. Really creating those barriers to exposure in everything we do, and making sure that people also just been thinking about the financial crimes that can happen. And I recently saw somebody talk about this, having a safe, we think about this from a personal level, but really having safe pass phrases or something like that. So if people call and say, hey, I need you to transfer this money to me right now. Okay, what's the phrase that we always say when we're doing those kind of transactions on the fly or over the phone? So it really is about being, unfortunately, cynical and a little bit suspicious about things so that you're putting in the most structure that you can possibly put in at the beginning. And then it's not a once and done. So it is really always educating yourself and staying on top of the day-to-day operations and making sure that you're keeping your team and yourself really aware of potential risks as they unload. And that includes some policies and processes. How do we travel with our laptops? Where do we store our data? It's really who needs to have access to what data. It shouldn't be wide open. Picking appropriate account security as an example. So there's a lot of those things, and then there's lots of tools out there. So again, if you have an advisor or somebody who can help you when you're starting up a new business, advising you on some simple tools, and it doesn't have to be crazy expensive. A lot of what we've talked about is about the social engineering side of things. So making sure that people take responsibility and don't offload that to the company. And when you're starting up, you are everything. You're the company, the people, the whole thing. So it is really just about thinking through things and doing it in a very methodical and one step at a time approach.
Absolutely. So right from the very beginning, making sure it is something core to the culture. Right. And by focusing in on that cybersecurity piece, you're not in any way, as you're saying, Gayleen, hindering the potential for innovation, but you're allowing for a safe environment for that innovation to be able to take place.
That's right. They don't have to be at odds with each other at all.
Yeah. Fantastic. Now, Farah, from your perspective in healthcare, we know that sharing electronic health records is essential for patient care. You've talked about the value that health information has. So what kind of safeguards and standards are in place to help protect privacy in this digital age and to make people feel safe within the healthcare sector?
It seems like we're almost in some ways behind in some of what we're doing here in Canada. Like I would just say, we had this visit, as you mentioned, I've just finished this National Health Fellows program, and part of our program included a visit to San Francisco, and we saw, lots of innovation there and a lot happening in the healthcare space. talked about the value of healthcare data and actually the importance of it, in making medical advances, being able to, look at early disease intervention, linkages between providers and professionals who are delivering care, all that kind of stuff. But with that, and I think with the advent of the electronic health record as our main source of data in healthcare, we have effectively given the public more access to information and made it much, much easier for people to know things about you. And so I think two really, really important things that I would highlight. So as the recipient of care or the patient, I think we've already talked about this, but I don't think we could probably say it enough, is that password piece and the two-factor authentication. It has to be something that you do, especially with data that can't be changed. I think that is a critical piece. The other piece, I think, and the safeguards that are in place, and I mean, maybe some of you who are aware of and familiar with case law and things that have happened in the healthcare space, the space with breach of data, is access to information that you're not allowed to access. So someone beyond the circle of care accessing a patient's data. And so as a result of that, many of the systems that are now operating in the healthcare space actually have an audit function that's integral to the system. And so what that allows us to be able to do in healthcare is really look at who's viewing the patient record, when, at what time, for what purpose. There's almost like a digital signature that exists. So the audit process and the tracking is a really, really important safeguard, and in many ways has saved a lot of inadvertent disclosure of information that shouldn't be. So I think those two things are really great safeguards. There's probably several others, because I don't think systems like this, are implemented without a lot of thought. But I would just also go back to we as healthcare employers is educating our staff about the importance and the use of that data. Our organization is very mobile in nature. And so, as in terms of efficiency, a lot of times you might just send a quick text, or you might just send a Teams message about personal health information. So a lot of, my role as Chief Privacy Officer is to educate and re-educate in different ways. And I think we're going to get to that as we talk a little bit more, but really just to remind people that this is really personal information, and we need to be serious in the way that we're sharing it, because it can get into the wrong hands, and that could be really problematic.
Absolutely. And hearing these safeguards definitely, I know it's reassuring for me. I'm sure reassuring for many that are on this webinar when it comes to our very personal health information. But as we know, cyber criminals, cyber threats are becoming increasingly more sophisticated, as Gayleen outlined at the beginning. So what they're doing now might become even more and more complex and sophisticated in the future. So how do we stay on top of this? And how do we stay ahead of all of the sophistication that's coming from this very, very complex space? Farah, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think post-pandemic, I think it's really important for us to be thinking about these things and the investment. I know there's smaller organizations and there's, different ability from a financial perspective to be able to invest in these things, but it truly is becoming a serious risk. We see this with the increase in costs in insurance premiums and that sort of thing around cybersecurity. So it really is something that organizations should take seriously, and I think invest in terms of their digital infrastructure, and constantly be evolving that in order to address some of the new threats that are in the on the landscape. I think the regular use of education, training, it's not a one-time thing. It's something that happens over and over and over again, and there's different stories and different things that come up. Very recently, last week, I think it was just last week, is there were Ontario hospitals that were compromised in terms of their because of a cybersecurity breach. And so for all healthcare providers, I think this is a moment in time where you say, hey, we've got to really make sure that things are in order, time to double check, time to do some testing, right? Some different education for our people. I think the other thing too is a lot of our equipment is becoming digital in nature. And so these things have connection to the internet. So they are also compromised or could be compromised in some way. So, making sure you're updating the systems in a timely way, making sure that that equipment is functioning the way it's supposed to be functioning. I think as we become more progressive and more advanced, with that comes more risk. And then I have to say, that multi-factor authentication, I'm going to sound like a broken record. I myself despise having to do it, but I make myself, because it is truly an important way to prevent some of these bad actors from getting in. So.
Absolutely. And further to your point, I mean, it's about education. And I know that Gayleen and I, coming from an educational institute, will absolutely agree. Gayleen, can you expand upon that from an employee perspective? How do you educate employees about cybersecurity risk and best practices, in particularly when we are like post-pandemic in a remote or a hybrid work environment? So what's the best way to be able to get that education piece across?
It's a great question, and I think Farah did a really great job of talking about just the value of ensuring that this is front of mind and repeated. So it's not, again, a once and done reality. And I think, the move to home work environments really changed our, I always call them controls or oversight from a cybersecurity perspective. People are in their own homes, they're on their own networks, they're using, in some cases, their own devices. And so you don't have the same level of controls that you might have had in order to try and protect everybody from the outside world and or themselves from doing things that they may not or should not necessarily be doing. So I think that it is really important to remind people that it's impossible to separate personal from professional in many cases now. So whatever we're putting in place to protect them professionally also protects them personally and vice versa. So if they're, protecting their own personal data, protecting their own environment, it actually does help us to protect our environment as well. So we're quite symbiotic now in terms of cybersecurity. It's very hard to put lines in place. They're very blurred in terms of the impact. So I think the piece around education is important. We talk about, IT security as a team sport. Proactive, preventative, making sure that people understand that they are an important member of our overall cybersecurity team. It doesn't matter what your role or position is, and helping them to understand what the best practices and policies are around online safety. And we've talked about a number of those things, passwords, using different accounts for different purposes, enabling multi-factor authentication, updating software devices, and all of that was very much about our personal activities as well. Be very suspicious. To your point earlier, Melina, people are very busy, but we have to really be thoughtful about the activities that we undertake and is going to be. And so putting clear guidelines as an employer, we have to help people understand what our expectations are of them in terms of their activity, especially in the hybrid environment, and how we anticipate them to use our devices, not their own devices, as an example, and all the other things we have already talked about. And then those training sessions. And I love the word that you used earlier, because I think it's really critically important, that idea, the culture of cybersecurity or safety. So if you can think about it from that perspective and take away sort of the danger words of cybersecurity, it's really about safety. And we're trying to make safe the work environment for each other. I think sometimes the productivity piece gets in the way, to your point, Farah. Sometimes this MFA is just slowing me down from getting online or doing whatever. And we are always, all of us, highly productive, trying to get a lot of things done. But if we slow down a little bit, I can guarantee you when there is a cyber incident, it stops everything else. That becomes the highest priority. So if you want to think about productivity, you have to think about what you're doing to stop an impact to productivity as well, and really just changing the story in people's minds about the effort to ensure that we're, it's being proactive rather than being a situation where you have to be reactive. Because once we have a breach or an incident, it really, and I've been through a few of them, great to have that experience, but wouldn't want to live through it again. It's a lot of work. It's very stressful and highly concerning. And for anyone who's had, a credit card hack or any sort of breach in their own personal environment, that is a really, it's a really scary situation, and it can be very extreme depending upon the circumstances. So yeah, we just really have to help people understand the reasons why, and everyone wants to know why do I have to do this? We can really talk about that in pretty real and stark terms.
Yeah. So a common theme of what we're hearing today is that everybody has to take responsibility for this, right? It is not something that just resides with the security team. Some of my research looks at that everybody piece and understanding those differences across the different kinds of people that make up our communities and make up our organizations, especially when it comes to our perspectives around privacy, security, and trust. So as an example, older adults tend to feel less in control of their personal information when it comes to younger adults. And as a result, might have higher privacy concerns, especially when it comes to some of their health information. But from the flip side, older adults are also less likely to take privacy and security steps to protect themselves online because they might not necessarily have the background, the knowledge, the education, the know-how to be able to do so. Whereas younger generations are more likely to rely on secure VPNs, those infamous two-factor authentications, and focus in on privacy-focused browsers as well. So for both Farah and Gayleen, in your own industries, I'm sure you'll agree that a one-size-fits-all approach does not necessarily work to instill security-focused behaviors and practices and making your stakeholders feel safe. So can you provide some examples of how you might use different approaches to different groups to encourage these kinds of best practices? Let's start with you, Farah, please.
Sure. So I love this question because it's something that our team contends with daily. I work for a national healthcare organization. So as you can imagine, there's a real diverse range of employees, of people, varying knowledge about privacy and security practices, different roles, different responsibilities. And so one of the things we have worked really, really hard to do is figure out ways where we can share important information quickly, but also at the level that people need it. And so I'm going to talk about some of the tools that we've designed because, we've had some good feedback, but we're always adjusting and really trying to respond to what the needs are. One of the things we started a couple of summers ago was, it was called Summer Privacy Spotlights. And, it was these really short blogs, really, really easy information to digest on the run, on the fly, that people could read about through their email, but then it would also be housed in other areas where they could access later on if they had, a question that came up. They at least knew where to go. So it was just a way to push them back to the source of the information. And that's landed, I think, fairly well. And we've now had, a repeated summer of privacy spotlights. We've also prepared, special edition spotlights. So when something hot has happened in the environment, we'll send out a communication. And often we do that in collaboration with other teams. So specifically the security team, we work really, really closely with them if something has happened, and we'll send out a joint blog. We hold obviously things like lunch and learns. We tailor the content to the specific province in which individuals are operating or where things are happening most frequently. We'll share content like that when the time seems right. So special training, special education. And then finally, I think I referred to this as we have a hub, or, it's like this mini intranet or database of our content where everything is housed. So you have, historical information, you have current information, and it's updated very, very frequently. So when you have a large employee group and they're all very, very different in nature, even if you're, you know, hitting 50%, I think you're doing better than if you are not, you know, targeting anybody. So I think those strategies have really been quite helpful. And, you know, one other one that I think we're going to start to think on, and it's a tool we've used in other ways for communication with our staff, is through text messaging. So we have a real mobile workforce. So if you can send reminders out like that, and we've developed an app as an organization. So there's different ways to push out, I think, info based on some of the, you know, the innovation you even have within your own organization.
That's fantastic. Now, Gayleen, similarly within a university setting, very different kinds of populations, right? A student population, a staff population, then you've got like the old school people like me, the researcher population. So what kind of different approaches do you use to be able to communicate and get those best practices from very, very different populations with different experiences and different expectations and perceptions?
It's a great question, and I want to applaud Farah. I think you outlined quite a number of really effective tools, so well done. Yes, you're right. We have a very diverse group of constituencies. Students are interesting. I mean, I'm going to say this somewhat tongue-in-cheek, but it's not false necessarily. So this is October, and we're at the very end of it, obviously. Which we can see in the beautiful background that Farah has, Cybersecurity Awareness Month. So we do pop-ups across campus and get right in front of students and have contests to get them to come and understand how to use their multi-factor authentication, or giving them tips on how to set up their passwords more effectively, and to talk to them about cybersecurity. So getting out and using social media, Instagram as an example, and having opportunities there, and highlighting their ability to learn more about cybersecurity, where they can get resources to support them. So, you know, that's really in your face, make it fun, try to just get something to stick with people around some of these ideas about passwords, MFA, you know, think before you click. When it comes to our staff, faculty, and researchers, I think using researchers as a great example. The one thing that no researcher wants is someone to get in the way of their research or to slow them down. It's, you know, there's really dedicated individuals who have a really important job and really deep activity around the research that they're doing. So it needs a bit more of a soft touch. We need to go and speak with them individually and help them understand how we can help them to improve the security in their environment, to help protect their research, or to help protect the systems that they absolutely rely on for research. So it needs a different type of really bespoke kind of support and service around education and what have you, but really those one-on-one or more build trust kind of conversations, so that they understand that you're really there to help, not be bureaucracy and get in the way. And then from a staff faculty perspective, it's hitting on all of those things. Yes, we may have policies and people need to be educated and know about them. Yes, there are standard tools that we're putting in place that everybody's got to use, whether you like it or you don't like it. Unfortunately, you know, we're rolling it out across campus for people. But education is really important, again, because it's helping people understand why. You know, why are you adding all of these additional tools in place? And then I think from an organizational perspective, the other component here is just leadership buy-in. We have an IT security roadmap. We took it through all levels of IT governance and to the board. And we meet with our audit and risk folks on a regular basis. We have a chief risk officer. We have an internal auditor. We have people that we, you know, there are policies, there are processes that we're following to help ensure that McMaster is safe and secure. And so helping people to understand some of those either compliance or legislative requirements for doing some of this work is also important. So there's a bit of carrot stick in there. I mean, I love to throw a lunch and give you treats and, you know, do all the fun stuff, and then go to the, you know, the business side of things and help you understand we're a large institution and we have a lot of risk that we have to mitigate and work around while we, you know, continue to do all the things that we're actually here to do, which is not, cybersecurity isn't core, but it has now to be baked into pretty much everything. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a look into the way we try to deal with this across the constituencies.
Absolutely. And what I'm hearing across both of you is that it's, as we like to say in the business school, it's a top down and a bottom up approach, right?
Yeah.
So that everybody really understands what it means for them and their worlds and what's important to them, right? And that everybody has to be involved because you're only as strong as your weakest link in many cases, right? Now, as we roll into answering some of the questions from the audience and the questions that came in earlier, I want to leverage up a question that came up in the Q&A, and this might be a nice way to wrap up this section around the future and trends and technology. There was a question around AI and how AI, where did the question go now here? How the use of AI to mimic human voices and behaviors, and it makes it just that much more complex. Farah, maybe if you can share with us your thought about emerging technologies, AI being a big one, when it comes to how sophisticated the threats might be, but importantly also, what are those game changer technologies that will really help us to deal with these kinds of cyber threats in the future?
It's such an evolving space. And I think, Gayleen, we talked about this a little bit through our chat before the session, but the like AI is here. It is here, it's happening. And, I come from a very, very cautious type of role and background. And, as much as I am really, really supportive of the change and integration of this, I think that we have to proceed with AI fairly cautiously, especially in healthcare. And the reason I say that is because, AI can be taught anything, and AI can be taught the wrong thing. And the implications of being taught the wrong thing and it taking off in a way that's not controlled without guardrails, I think is very, very risky. So I think it's here. I think it's being integrated. We're going to see more of it. I think, Chat GPT, did anybody even really know what that was? I probably will show how how unadvanced I am, but people didn't really know what Chat GPT was, and now everybody knows what that is. Everybody knows how to use it, and that happened really, really, really quickly. So I can see that happening in all of our spaces across many, many disciplines. But I think we do need to proceed with caution, and I think there has to be the appropriate guardrails that are put up. And if I could just go back to that medical piece and that information and incorrect medical information with AI, it can be so detrimental. It can cause death. It can cause disease. Who knows? Like, there's probably so much that can happen if the incorrect data is put in. So as AI becomes, I think, probably a staple of our healthcare system, we will need to ensure that we're looking at that information, we're verifying it, putting checks and balances in place, making sure that that output is actually accurate before it sort of takes off and forms a life of its own. So
fantastic. Thank you so much. In our remaining probably about 10 minutes, 9 minutes, we're going to go more specifically into the questions that came in. They came prior to the webinar, and also some of the ones that came in the chat. Thank you very much for those that have entered those questions into the chat. The first set of questions, I think they bucket quite nicely together, is individuals asking how to minimize the amount of data being collected on them. That was something that came in prior to the webinar, and then in the Q&A, there's something related around how we use social media, web searches, and other kinds of web activities and the information that's gathered there. So, ladies, do you have any tips to be able to help protect yourself so that you're not necessarily spreading as much of your data on the interwebs as we are and very much unaware of? Let's start with you, Gayleen. Some tips for us.
Yeah, absolutely. These are really important questions, and this is a bit of a build off of Farah's last answer as well. I think it is really thinking about the data that you're sharing. So we have some personal choice in this, And I think people need to really consider that when you are, signing up for a newsletter or trying to get a discount with a company, or, there's all different ways that we are actually handing our data quite willingly over. And you really have to think about what is it being used for. And we've heard the stories about Meta and, how social media has turned on us, if I can say it like that, to some degree, because there is a lot of data mining that goes on. So one of my team members was talking about this in the context of AI, and that is read the terms and conditions. We never do it. We all just click through everything. If you do that with whether it's Chat GPT or Enterprise Bing Chat or whatever the tool set is, and you go through and you read and inform yourself before you actually say yes or click or start to do things, it will really give you a good sense of what is possible in terms of data being mined from you and used. And then I would say, you go to a website, if it gives you an opportunity not to accept all cookies, don't accept them. It is really about, again, education and really understanding data. People hear about tools that, somebody they know use, and so they go use it as well. The more systems, applications, the more footprint that we have online, the more potential there is for some kind of a cyber breach or risk for us. So I do think that it's really, again, about the individual really understanding what you're doing and why are you doing it, and is the reward worth the risk? I think that's always the challenge in all of these things, is balancing out what you're going to get from what you might have to give away.
Absolutely. And I'll just absolutely echo that. There's been a few times where I've been presenting to large audiences, 200, 250 people, and I asked the question, how many of you have actually read the terms of use for something like Meta or any kind of social media platform that you've used? I think once I've had one person put up their hand. So it is taking that into our own hands and realizing what we're giving up. Absolutely.
And can I just say, Melina, the other piece, this is true for all of us. Again, shouldn't be once you're done. I mean, when I joined Facebook, I don't want to tell you when, a long time ago, it was a very different platform than it is now. And so, we have choice again to be able to either review what's changed or is different and to delete. We always have that opportunity. So I do think it's important to remind people they're not just victims in this, that we are all collaborating in this online world as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Farah, there's an interesting question that came in through the Q&A during our discussion that relates specifically to healthcare around some medical services that are outsourced to third-party services. How is that data protected with those providers, and the worry of, when it is sold to a third party and they're providing value through that interaction, how do you ensure that your medical information, your health information is safe?
Well, it is a really good question. And, I think I'll step back and talk about processes, I think, a bit more generally, because that, and I can share what we do at our organization when we partner or we subcontract or we, integrate new innovation into our day-to-day practices. This is where the link between privacy and security is a necessity. There is no option but for it to collaborate. We are a team when it comes to these kinds of things. And so from the privacy perspective, we do something called a privacy impact assessment. And from the security perspective, we do a threat risk assessment. And I think at many organizations, both are read and reviewed by both sets of teams so that there's good attention, good dialogue, good decision-making around whether or not to integrate new innovation, transfer data somewhere. So we do a lot of that analysis, I think, as an organization to help protect the information that's out there. But I couldn't agree with both of you more in terms of, how much we give. Like the reason, the internet and everything else that we use today exists is because we all shared that information. Every last one of us have played a role in that. And so I'm not suggesting we don't do that, because I think as a society, we've had so much progress as a result of that. But we aren't victims in this. And I think we do have choice. And I think, as our tools become more sophisticated, we do need to think twice before we click yes. right?
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. It is our responsibility as well. And I love that perspective of the two, the privacy and the security pieces, very much having to work hand in hand. And your approach of doing it within healthcare is wonderful, Farah. So thank you. This time has gone very, very fast. This is great. It is because of the discussion, I think, has just been so interesting in discussion because of you and your engagement. I want to just, in the last few minutes that we have, take this opportunity for you to share what's going on in terms of your lives, upcoming events, things that you want to plug, or things you think that the audience should know. Farah, let's start with you.
well, thank you. First of all, this has been really enjoyable, probably the fastest hour of my life. Actually, it's gone very, very quickly. I think as someone working in healthcare, someone who is really, really passionate about privacy, I think, and the idea of privacy and security in the blend. I think our organization is very, very happy to share our expertise in this space. So, inviting people to network with us, connect with us, we would be happy to do that across multiple disciplines. And I think, just from a personal perspective, it's an area that, as I said, has become a pretty big passion of mine as of late. And I'm looking to expand my network across different disciplines. So, I invite you, all of you, whoever's listening, to connect if you're interested. We talk about education, smaller groups, smaller organizations. We're very happy to share our learning and our expertise with others. So that's all I'll say. I think it's really been a lot of fun. So thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Farah. Gayleen, what about you?
That's great, Farah. You've been super engaging, and Milena, awesome. So I agree. It's been a very fast hour. Similarly, I work at McMaster. I'm probably the only Gayleen if you Google me, but cto.mcmaster.ca. We have a lot of material around cybersecurity, and we're continuing to evolve in that space. So always happy. And I would say in higher education, IT specifically, it is very much a sharing and collaborative community. I know people from coast to coast to coast. We're all working together to try and float everybody's boats a little bit higher around cybersecurity across the ecosystem. So CANSOC being one of the initiatives that we at McMaster got started with other institutions and is now being delivered across campus and across institutions as well. So happy to connect with people. Also, I also want to plug, if I may, Women in Tech series. I just launched my recent group of videos interviewing some of the women who are leading some of the organizations supporting higher education IT in our ecosystem here in Canada. And again, you can find that through my website. And there's a variety of other individuals that I've interviewed as well. And of course, every time I talk to amazing women leaders like yourselves, I might be coming and asking for an opportunity to interview and talk to you about the work that you do as well. It's a real passion of mine to both elevate and amplify the good work that other women are doing in technology and in leadership as well. But it's just a lot of fun for me to be able to spend time talking to people. So thank you so much for the opportunity today to participate in this really engaging and energizing conversation. Thank you, Milena. Well done.
Thank you. Thank you, Gayleen. And from my perspective, I'm going to echo what the two lovely ladies here have said, the opportunities for connection. So within the McMaster Digital Transformation Research Center, where I'm director, we're very keen to work closely with our non-academic partners across a wide variety of industries to help them understand their digital challenges and to enhance their digital user experiences. So if you're at all interested in having a tour of the center, super cool facility with some great tech, and have a conversation about some possible collaborations, feel free to contact me directly. I think I probably am. The only Milena is probably Gayleen's, but only Gayleen at McMaster, or through our website, which is mdtrc.mcmaster.ca. More than happy to continue the discussion. So thank you again. Thank you to our audience for joining us today. We hope you gained some valuable knowledge and insights from the sessions. And thank you so very, very much, Farah and Gayleen, for this highly engaging discussion. I have truly enjoyed it. Have a good rest of the day, everyone, and happy Halloween all. Thank you, and
Happy
well
Halloween.
done.